Good evening, and welcome to Leadership Across Generations. I'm Alex Tock. I'm the director of the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to Bob and Phil and all of our amazing panelists here. The Thompson Center is really delighted to be able to work with UW Green Bay to bring you tonight's event on Leadership Across Generations. I additionally want to thank Chancellor Alexander here, Governor Thompson, of course, everybody here at UW Green Bay, Ruth and Mary Kate at the Thompson Center, and everybody else who's worked to put this event together. For those unfamiliar with the Thompson Center, allow me to say a few words about it. The Thompson Center was founded to follow in the footsteps of Governor Thompson, who proudly worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance the public good. The Thompson Center seeks to carry on Governor Thompson's legacy by informing and inspiring current and future public leaders, fostering leadership skills, and advancing effective public policy. We work to further these goals by funding events like this one, funding research and scholarships, and conducting other activities across the UW system. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight Phil Clampett. Phil is the Blair Endowed Chair of Communication and previously the Hendrickson Named Professor of Business here at UW Green Bay. He completed his doctoral work at the University of Kansas and began his career as a professor here in 1981. Since then, he has won numerous awards for his teaching and scholarship. He's embraced the moniker given to him by his students of Dr. So What, for so often prodding them about the implications of their ideas with that simple question. He's a frequent guest at multinational businesses, professional organizations, and universities, including such far-flung institutions as the University of Pisa and the University of Aberdeen. As a principal in his firm, Medicom, he consults on communications issues with a variety of organizations such as PepsiCo, Manpower, and the Bolt Company. His work on decision downloading, detailing how companies can effectively communicate decisions to those not involved in the decision-making process, has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and the MIT Sloan Management Review. He also authored the Sage Publications bestseller, Communicating for Managerial Effectiveness, now in its 6th edition, as well as Social Media Strategy, Tools for Professionals and Organizations, and Clear Thinking in an Age of Hype, Nonsense, and Anxiety. Most recently, he authored the book, Leading with Care in a Tough World, which serves as the basis for tonight's event. So please welcome Phil Clampett.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Wow, it's exciting to be here tonight. This is a really cool topic. I can hardly wait to share with you and see what kind of twists and turns tonight takes with all the cool panelists we have. It's just amazing. And we conceived this panel because we felt that we have so many leaders in the room, and so many of you I know, and some of you I'm learning to just met recently, and generational leadership is really what we need today, and learning to communicate and work and collaborate across those generations is a stunningly difficult thing to do. And fortunately, we have incredible panelists who I will introduce you to very shortly, who will help us work through that. And we also, if Tommy is still here and his daughter is still here, Tommy Thompson, are you still here someplace? Anyway, the daughter. Anyway, thank you so much for sponsoring this. Frankly, I've never done this before, and this is just the coolest opportunity, so I can't wait to see what happens tonight. And that's what always makes it fun. So without further ado, let me just introduce you to the panelists that we have tonight. In just 1 minute, I'm not going to go through an exposition. I promise I'm not going to lecture for the students in the room, but there are lots of ways to classify generations, and I'm not going to go through a great exposition of that. But one thing we know is that generations differ in a variety of ways. one of which is technology. I'm not going to ask how many of you in the room, well, yes, I will. I will ask. How many of you in the room remember when this was considered a mobile phone? Oh my goodness. Thank you very much. These are our two interns, Emily and Sid, who helped put this event together, so give them a big round of applause. Yeah, thank you guys. So that's one way in which generations differ. They also differ in lifestyle. They differ in belief structures. They differ in major world events. There are people that have reacted to the Depression, reacted to World War II, the Korean War, and now, of course, COVID being one of the primary world events. And then the priorities shift, and a variety of things shift as a result of that. And that requires a great deal of adroitness and innovative thinking on the part of leaders. And these 5 panelists have demonstrated that in extraordinary ways. Now, I'm going to introduce each panelist, and you can read their biography. I'm not going to read the entire biography because I've got something personal to say about each person. So I'm going to say that at the end. But our first panelist is Lori Butts. Well, welcome, Lori. And Lori is the CEO, president and CEO of the Capital Credit Union, and has for over 30 years worked in the financial services. What's really cool about Lori is that she has a Lifetime Achievement Award through the Fox Cities Chambers Conference regard to being a Volunteer of the Year. And I know from personal experience that she has done that. Lori also happens to be a former student of mine and my wife, Lori, and we all both remembered last night, we were thinking through it, how wonderful she was as a student, always smiling, always willing to learn and embrace every challenge that we ever had. So that was very, very cool. Lori, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Our second panelist is Mark Murphy, and most of you know the name. He's the Packers president and CEO, and he serves on the NFL Management Council Executive Committee, Competition Committee, College Relations Committees, Player Safety Advisory Panel, and Health and Safety Committee. He has an amazing career, and Mark doesn't know I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, Mark, so here you go. About 10 years ago, I interviewed Mark. He doesn't remember it, but he's a good defensive back, and they have short memories. And
too many short-yarded situations.
And so Mark gave me an amazing story about the role of instant replay and communication, and how it had changed the communication with the referees. I don't know if you remember that. Yep. And I've used that for many, many years to talk about the role of communication and the power of it. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I should also say I'm a proud member of the UWGB Council of Trustees.
Okay. Thank you. So you were here this morning, then, right?
We had meetings earlier this week. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Our third panelist is Barbara Lawton, who I frankly just met. And I met over graduation. I was so impressed by her graduation speech. And we had a nice talk afterwards, you remember? And it was really exploratory. And I couldn't imagine a more delightful person. So I started with my personal story, your professional credentials, two-term lieutenant governor. While in office, she created an economic development initiative to increase the status and contribution of women, which became a global model and established scholarships on citizen diplomacy and global security, and created Wisconsin's first green economy agenda. And so I just remember that conversation so well, so I had to bring you back. So welcome, Barbara.
Thank you so much.
Our third panelist is Alida Al-Sadi. She is a senior partner at Korn Ferry, and I believe her boss is here tonight. Is that correct? So she's currently leading a new business adventure, which I got to hear all about last night, involving, can I mention the name? Microsoft, and working with the team at Microsoft, in doing all kinds of cool stuff, which some I'm sure we can't talk about, but some which we can, including AI. So how to bring AI into the workplace as a viable tool. And we've been, she was a former student of mine as well. And so I'm just going to say this. You ready? I'm ready. So from the day we met to today, I've never had somebody who is so more embracing of new ideas. In fact, I kind of think of her. We were talking last night about AI is going to make us all obsolete. And I said, Alita, I got thinking in my head, Alita, there's no way. You've got an Elon Musk type mind. And I hope these view that as a compliment. So you've got such a broad, searching, incredible mind that it's amazing. So Alita, welcome.
Thank you. It is really a pleasure.
You're not offended, right?
No, I'm embarrassed.
And the final panelist is somebody I know very, very well. His name is Bob DeKoch. He's been a senior executive at a variety of companies, over 4 decades in the construction service industries, real estate development, pulp and paper, beverage industry, chemical industry. He's an amazing human being. And Bob and I, was it 30 years, Bob?
Well, I heard Alex say the year you started here, and it was shortly after that we met, so it's been a long time ago.
So Bob and I have worked for many years, and I was thinking about our relationship over the period of time. When I was in high school and college, I always had a debate partner, and we fought it out. And Bob has been my debate partner about issues regarding communication and leadership for many, many years, which resulted in the book that you have in front of you, as well as other books that we've worked together. And a true great friend and an incredibly interesting, insightful mind. His greatest gift, maybe one of his greatest gifts, is the ability to develop the talent of others. And what a wonderful legacy to pass on. So welcome, Bob.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Phil. It's very kind.
So with that said, I'm going to sit down and start with questions, and we're going to start with a question to each panelist, and then we're going to kind of throw it open with some open-ended questions, if that's all right. So Lori, the question, I'm going to start with you. When we first started talking about this project with you, you were one of the first people we contacted, and you had a very interesting reaction from somebody in your who was a colleague, and I thought you might share that experience with us, number one, and number two, talk a little bit about how you see generational differences in regard to financial concerns and financial issues that they might have.
Okay, well, it's kind of funny because Bill and I were talking about the fact that I was at coffee with a recent retiree. He's, in his early 60s, and we were talking about that this was a panel about generations, and he's like, oh, my goodness. Can you just tolerate all the millennials and, the different Gen Zs and whatever? And I said, well, interestingly enough, Capital Credit Union has 35% of our workforce are millennials, and 31% are Gen Zs. And he's like, you gotta be kidding me. And I mean, and this, I'm not making this up. And so, I'm smiling as he's a community leader, and I said, well, actually, it's pretty cool. He goes, how do you get them to do anything? I haven't met a millennial who wants to do anything. They're, they want to have flex time, and they want to work when they want to work, and they, and they want to make more money for not working, and and I said, okay, well, how did you grow up working? He's like, you know what? I was a hard worker. We got up early. We went to work. Our parents worked hard. We worked hard. And, he's kind of doing the whole fist pump thing. And he goes, and I never questioned leadership. I did what they told me to do. And I'm like, oh, well, why? And he goes, out of fear. That I was afraid. I was afraid they were going to fire me. I was afraid they were going to, tell my parents, or I was afraid of my parents. And I'm like, okay, it's interesting because I have a millennial daughter, and I said to him, I don't want her to have to work in fear. I said, and I called him by name and said, I've had bosses where I worked in fear, and I think the millennial group and the Gen Zs and have a good thing going. Maybe we should get fear out of the workforce. Is there really a place for that? And he started to ponder and like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. So I just thought it was really funny. He was just like, they need to be afraid. So. And as far as the financial differences, I actually don't see a ton of differences. The millennials and the Gen Z really want to save. Actually, they're better retirement planners than some of the boomers were, and they're focused on investments. They're not afraid to take some really interesting moves with crypto and all that kind of good stuff, and how they use their accounts is different. But for the most part, they're pretty similar in a lot of ways.
That's very interesting, and I wanted to start with that story because it's so old school in a lot of ways about leadership. And I've got a slide up there that kind of summarizes what I hope happens, and I think this first story illustrates it. That we have a lot of people up here with expertise that's amazing. We have a lot of people up here with an enormous amount of leadership energy. We have people up here with incredible experiences, life experiences. And I hope everybody walks away today with one or two insights that will help and shape their idea about leadership in the future, perhaps even leading with care, as we talk about. Which leads me to my second guest, which is Mark Murphy. And Mark, I think one of the most interesting things about the NFL has been that you were one of the first organizations that had to deal with political activism and had to deal with the Colin Kaepernicks and all these types of things that occurred, and social justice issues. And we see companies now, organizations now grappling with that. In fact, most companies I work with now, they're asking me about that very question. So I'm wondering if you could share with us some of the lessons you learned in dealing with social activism and dealing with the political activism, and kind of let us know about how that plays out across generations. My sense was that some generations reacted really negatively and other generations were far more embracing.
Well, let me just say this. There's a big difference between our season ticket holders and our players. And when it comes to social justice issues, yeah, that is, and that's really the crux of it. That was a really difficult issue for us. Well, in some ways, but also, there was, when I played in the NFL, I was viewed as a radical. I was Redskins player rep. I was vice president of the union. The owner of the Redskins at the time, a man named Jack Cook, called me a communist. Said I was a fine young man, but he didn't want me as a partner. So, but we had a saying back then, and actually Ed Garvey came up with it, and it was, well, we are the game. And really, the players are integral to the game. So in my mind, there wasn't really an issue. We had to support them. And you're right, it was all around the Colin Kaepernick issue and some of the other things. And I think the most important thing we did was I sat down with all the players and just listened. And I think, there's a lot of qualities and traits that are important in leadership, but I think being able to really listen to people and then let them know that you care is integral. And I think we were the first NFL team to come out in support of the players' rights and social justice issues. I got some. I always get crazy letters from a number of fans, and so I knew they were upset. But I think we need to bring people along. This is the social justice issues. Well, and you know, it's really a generational issue, but also it's a racial issue. And you know, 80% of our players are black. You know, Green Bay, I mean, look, this room is not very diverse, and Green Bay is not a diverse community. And just talking to our players, for instance, it's hard for them to find a place where they can get a haircut because there aren't a lot of African American barbers in Wisconsin. So we bring them in for them. There's things that we do for specifically to help players make the transition. But I think the other thing that I've tried to do is, you know, to establish relationships. And obviously we've got a lot of players, but let the players know that you care about them. Talk to them about what issues they're dealing with. You know, I think it does help me, the fact that I did play in the league. I know, you know, the careers are short and injuries are difficult. You're always dealing with different challenges. But I think what we like to say is we try to treat our players the way we would want that people to treat our own sons. And you know, I think if you have, you know, obviously there are generational differences, but I think if they know that you really care and you really listen to them, I think you have an advantage and a chance to really be a successful leader.
Great. I hope we get a chance to explore that just a little bit further. So,
sure.
And one in particular to start to think about is like the slogans on the back of players' helmets and how that decision emerged and things like that might be of interest to people. So maybe as the panel develops, we'll develop a look at that. Barbara, politicians inherently have to deal with generational issues, even you know, and diversity issues and a variety of things like that when you're passing legislation, making decisions, et cetera. So what are some of the lessons you've learned doing that and working through that with your incredible spirit?
Well, I think first you have to think about the issues that cross generations and that we have to deal with in governance and the political realm have to do are issues both within the administrative and the legislative bodies. They're issues of how you set policy priorities. They're issues of who has access to get on the ballot, who has access to resources to get on the ballot. And they're issues of, if you want to be elected, you have to pay attention to how many people are in each generation and how you're speaking to them. Because as a baby boomer, I'm now not the biggest generation in terms of numbers. The millennials are. And that ought to help people treat them with more respect, right? So what I found is that in governance, people from my generation and young, a little younger too, see the future coming at them like a speeding train. And so there's, it's coming so fast, they try to ameliorate the impact with what I often thought of as just very incremental legislation and cautious policy and the way we always did things, and with little to no imagination because they were overcome with their learned wisdom or earned wisdom, and they had earned a cynicism over time too. And the younger generation that I came to know has this high-arcing look at the future and a lot of ambition, and not hamstrung by those other things. So my role in office was to make sure that they had a powerful voice in all conversations, which is not sitting around the edge of a table where things are being debated, but actually an empowered voice. And to be supportive through getting them to network with the people who could help them learn more and go further. And I guess to really make sure they were building their resumes, because these are leaders now, and we want them to just continue to grow better and better. So it was a real privilege to work across generations.
Wonderful, wonderful answer. Alida, we're going to take a slightly different turn with your question to start off with, because you have such experience working literally around the world on issues like AI and in strategic issues with strategic, executives, et cetera. As you look at issues like AI and you look at issues like the strategy in dealing with those kinds of things that are really going to hit this generation, all of us in the room, in a different way, how do you see that playing out in the future?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to back up a minute and just start sort of from the beginning and move us through, right? So in business, we started by bringing in tools, and that's how we came and did our jobs. We had tools, and we used the hammer, and we hammered the nail. Then we moved to a time where we were looking for efficiencies and productivity. How can we do it faster? And how do we understand how to do it better? And then we went to another age, which was an age of what we call the employee sentiment, right? Like, how do we understand whether or not people are happy at work and with their jobs? And we started doing assessments, and we started doing surveys asking people if they were happy in their jobs. And then we moved to a time or an age where we said, we really want to build an employee experience, right? And so this employee experience, we started to look at personas and generations, and we started to try to understand humans in groups. And we built then facilities where there were ping pong tables, and we brought in the chefs, and we brought in the sleeping pods, and that was the time of employee experience. Well, we are moving into a new age, and this age we call the age of reciprocity. But what is happening is, with the intersection between humans and technology now, you're looking at people who can have their needs met in the flow of work. They can be understood as individuals, and data and the analytics can actually get us to the point where we can receive like an Amazon experience every day in our work. And so this is really transforming the way in which we in business have to think about our business strategy, how we think about our people strategies, and how we come together to understand ourselves in our day and each other in the day, and then design our systems, which are changing rapidly and will continue to evolve at a rapid pace as AI is coming onto the scene, and as it is learning how we behave in our days. So I think that there's many impacts that are going to happen over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and it's going to be a rapid acceleration, and we will see that over.
I hope we can explore that just a little bit more as we move forward with this discussion, particularly the collaborative component in regard to technology and people, because we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration tonight, but we also need to talk about collaboration between people and technology and the challenges that represents. So, and then finally, let me introduce Bob DeKoch. I've introduced him before, but Bob, I understand you wrote a book with a UWGB professor, and so I thought you might talk about that book, which I believe we have copies for most people in the room, and be happy to sign later, how that applies to leading across generations.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Happy to be with you all tonight. Thank you for coming. We already told about our story of working together for a long time, right? 2 other books and this one. Let me tell you a little story about this book and how it got started and lead into the answer to Phil's question. I was heartened by all of the references of the other panelists to things like listening and empathy and experiences and engagement, because that's what we're talking about in this book. And we started writing this book in the months before the pandemic, and we uncovered some research by Gallup. You were talking about statistics. Gallup produces a lot of statistics, but let me quote 3 of them. In the year before, when they surveyed, year before the pandemic, Gallup said 15% of employees in the U.S. are truly engaged in their company. 15%. They said 70% of people would work harder if they felt more appreciated. And 70% said their leaders didn't have the communication skills to lead. Now that's across all generations. I don't think you could get to those poorer numbers if all generations weren't contributing to the feeling, right? So when you soak on that a little bit and you think how stunning that is, with all of the effort that we put in to getting better at leadership? And if all of the models for leadership were truly working, how in the world can we have people feeling that way about either their organizations or their leaders? And why isn't that such low-hanging fruit that we should be dedicated to fixing it? And that's what we set out to do in this book, to contribute to a body of knowledge that might take a look at some of the things you've already heard about. You know, it doesn't cost a leader a dime to let an employee know they appreciate even the little things they do. And that means so much to every one of us, doesn't it? All of us are employees. So how do we do the little things right? We talk about some core beliefs, 5 core beliefs that leaders have to think about in order to be a good leader. And then they have to have 9 practices that are everyday practices, and we lay them out in the book to deliver on those beliefs. And so in that way, the book is set up as kind of a workbook. And we've worked our way through the research and through the practice that we've both had to try to explore this area of care. Care is not a word that's normally associated with leadership literature. If you go out and search leadership, you'll find all kinds of different words. You'll find servancy, you'll find management by objectives, you'll find quality programs, you'll find a lot of things, but you won't find the word care very much, although Mark Murphy mentioned the word care 5 minutes ago.
I read your book.
That was not a planted question, Larry. So, you know, why is it? I mean, people really yearn for leaders who care about them. We think they yearn for leaders who have their backs. We think they yearn for leaders who listen to them, Mark. And I'll tell you a little story about the listening, and we use that term a lot, listening, in the book. And a young woman who read an early draft of the book came into my office and said, you need to add something to this listening part of the book. You have to add, in addition to listening, you have to make sure that the people think they're being heard. Not whether you think they're being heard, do they think they're being heard? And I'll tell you, the person who suggested that to me is sitting in this audience tonight. So we all feel it, we all know it. The things we have to do to care more about people, listen better, be more empathetic, are things that go beyond deal with servant leadership. Servant leadership is great. We need to take a step beyond that. That's what this book is about. We hope you enjoy it, and the rest of the panel here tonight. So
Thank you, Bob. We're going to leave the rest of this kind of organic and watch the discussion. I'm going to throw a question out, and anybody wants to jump in, I'm going to let you jump in and just do it instead of being directed.
Well, I'll jump in.
Okay, jump in.
How many of you have ever heard of the sophisticated management principle called MWA? Management by walking around. It sounds very corny, but I'll just tell you, in my playing career, I played for the Redskins, now the Commanders. Played 8 years, and about halfway through my career, I look back, and the very best thing that happened to me is they hired a man named Joe Gibbs. And not only was he a great coach, he was a great leader, and I was captain, so I worked pretty closely with him. But after every practice, he would walk by my locker, sit down, and say, "How do you think practice went today? Or the things that we can do differently?" And I noticed that he'd stop by several players' lockers, and what he was doing was management by walking around. And that's something that I've tried to incorporate, and sometimes it's hard. You get caught up in it's busy, you got emails to end, you got meetings, but I've found that when you walk around as a leader and you stop in people's offices and just sit down and say, how are things going? What things are we working on? Anything that I can do differently or better? You'd be amazed that what people are willing to open up and talk to you about. It's one thing if you call them in for a formal meeting, but when you stop into their office, and you know, I just think it's a way to break the ice with your employees, but also it shows them that you care. And then, as Bob said, you know, and then when you can follow through and show them that you really are listening and you're going to make changes, that's when I think you can really have successes.
So how do you go about signposting those changes that go beyond just saying I'm listening, but say, hey, I actually took action as a result of what I heard, and realizing in part that sometimes they're going to suggest things that are really stupid and not things that you can do. So how do you navigate that?
Well, I don't. Somebody else can add, but if it's a crazy idea, you can just say, "Hey, I thought about it, but I don't. For these reasons, I don't think it makes any sense." But you know, when things when they make suggestions that do make sense, they follow up on it and say, you know, brought it to our senior executive team, and we're going to make that change.
Well, and I'll add, you know, we do all employee engagement surveys pretty regularly, and their experience with those from other organizations.
Anonymous?
Yes, 100% anonymous, actually managed through a third party, and then we get the results come in. But one of the things that had happened is they got into this phase of, well, they're not going to do anything with this information. So I really had to read every single line and then somehow go back and respond. And some of it's uncomfortable to respond to. And one of the ones that we got a lot was, can I color my hair blue? Because we have a policy in a financial institution to have relatively natural hair color. I'll say relatively because some of them are a little bit of a stretch. Anyway, but anyway, so but what I found that I had to do, I personally have a personal opposition to, blue hair. So I had to do personal research to try to get out of my own opinion and get into that space of consideration. It wasn't a space of yes yet, and everybody who works with me knows that no just means not yes yet. But what it did is it gave me an opportunity to really do the research. I interviewed, I'm embarrassed, I'm looking at Lisa, our CFO, in the audience. She was with me when I just walk up to someone who has blue hair or purple hair or whatever color and start interviewing them. And they're very open to answering questions about it. But I think that's what it takes is consideration. Listen, show that you care enough to give consideration to what they're asking for, even though my answer was no, or not yes yet.
I'm getting a little worried about this hair discussion because I have none to color. But anybody else want to comment on that? Because it's a really interesting dynamic. Alita, do you want to?
I want to go in a little different direction, if that's okay. So walking about, right? Very important. But when you have a team,
you don't want to be a desk jockey.
However,
that's the
yeah, I know. However, there are teams that are global, and there are teams that are no longer located in offices, and there are teams that are remote. And so my team is all over the globe, and we are working with clients all over the globe. And so listening becomes a very different activity when you're trying to listen using technology, when you're trying to cue into individual responses when you can see from about here up, and our bodies and our minds are just not quite there yet, right? So we're trying to figure out, all of us are trying to figure out new ways of how do we listen, how do we understand what we're listening to, and then how do we create those new pathways because of the technology. And so our team has been working diligently to try to figure out, like even ourselves, how do we interact in a way that we are actually listening to each other in new and different ways, as opposed to sort of the old paradigms we come from. So if we're talking about
It's hard
generations,
to just pop in on somebody's Zoom. You know, it's not the same.
No, but then you start to think about like the Skype opportunity, or where you are Teams opportunity, where you can ping each other, right? Like you're pinging each other instead of you're popping into the office. And what is the water cooler conversation? And so very different, unique environment we're all starting to move into.
Bob, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, it's very challenging. Multiple channels is a really important thing. I mean, I think we can get focused on, well, we've got Zoom now, so everything's got to go through Zoom. But written emails, texts, videos, Zoom, and even when you're global or spread out, I mean, we got to be on an airplane, or they've got to be together. You got to get together sometime, because I think people want personal connection yet. And if you mix that all together, I think, and you're genuine about it, I think people will see that the effort is being made to not only communicate transparently, but listen hard and understand what people are saying. So,
Barbara, you want to jump in the political arena. You're kind of juggling both the technology world as well as, you know, face-to-face interactions like this. So maybe you could share your insights about that.
I was thinking about managing while walking about, and when I was in office, and my office was in the Capitol, it was really important for me to go to people and not wait for them to come to me, and to go to people of the other party. And I just very systematically went through the entire legislature of all ages, having different responses, but I wanted to try to forge a personal relationship. And even I knew that we were in dramatically different positions on things that were important to me, to open a conversation and find a way for us to share something in common, and to be able to move forward in conversation about something else.
Maybe you could share an insight or a story about, like, that would show how you built that common. One of the problems I see today is that there are people on different sides of the political spectrum, or on a different issue or whatever. It doesn't have to be political, it could be anything, but where they find it easy to get these cocoons and camps where they don't talk to one another.
Yeah.
And so how do you bridge that in a meaningful way to build the kind of relationship that you just described? I don't mean to put you on the spot on that.
No, that's okay. I mean, there are a lot of stories that come to mind that maybe aren't here, but one way, Wisconsin was the only state that didn't have a women's caucus in the legislature. And we didn't have a lot of women. It was maybe 20% in each house at most, and we're still not in a very stunning situation in terms of the adequate representation of women. But I invited all of the women from both houses. I thought, I'm not a legislator, but somebody's got to lead this and get them working together, because that's my hope for a higher level or any productivity in the legislature, is to see if the women can do it. And the first time that I invited them all, I had 5 maybe from the Democratic Party and 3 from the Republican Party, which to me was terrific. And then the next time that we met, there were more. And by the way, Judy Kasmarek, is that right? Who, former Assemblywoman from Green Bay, who was enthusiastic about this, an ardent Republican, but she said, whenever we're getting together, we're going to take a $1 bill, I'll show you. And she showed us how to fold it and make a pin. And she said, that'll be our secret sign that we're getting together, and it stands for pay equity. I thought, whoa, we're really moving fast here now. This is great. But then when they wanted to meet off campus, out of the Capitol, and have dinner together, and we arranged a time when they were in session that everybody could come. And a few hours beforehand, one of the women from the Republican caucus called and said, our speaker has called a meeting right when we were going to have dinner. Can we put it off for an hour? We don't have any business to do. It'll be done in an hour. I said, sure. So I sent out a note to everybody. And then she called back and said, well, I just heard back from him that it's going to take all evening. And so are you willing to go one more move in this game with me? And we did. But what we discovered, of course, was that they were not going to be allowed to make those relationships and hold on to their committee assignments and their chairmanships. So we tried to work outside of that, but it was terribly depressing. And as I have told young people that I mentor a lot of people both in the business and the political realm, just when you think you've lost your innocence, you're going to find there's more to lose.
You know, well, one thing I was going to share, a lot of leaders or bosses say, my door's always open. But the reality is, it's really hard to walk into the boss's office and say, you know, I think you should be doing this differently. But that's where I think getting out and meeting with people in their offices or in other settings helps break the ice and gives them the confidence to be able to say things that wouldn't just walking into your office.
I'd add to that, Mark. I think it's a leader's responsibility to make it safe. Whether you're in their office, they're in your office, and I think we all have to be just there to listen and ask people to tell you what's on their mind without reaction, without response, and just hear what they have to say. The test I always have, and for myself, because we're all guilty of this, if in your mind, when you're listening, you can hear the little bird trying to put together the opposing point of view that you're going to go back and argue about, you're not listening. You get a chance to do that, but you have to have all of your attention to hearing what you're hearing first.
I think it's interesting, though, you know, when we talk about the different approaches to leadership, the generational change, you know, I remember as a female leader, I was taught, don't cry. Don't let them see you sweat. Don't, you know, if you make a mistake, just figure out how to get past it really quickly, and, you know, and so forth. And then, you know, I don't know if it's age or whatever, but vulnerability is a gift. Genuine being you is a gift. I make fun of myself all of the time. I might have made a really bad decision already like 2 days ago, and I'll correct it then 2 days later and go, wow, well, what the heck was I thinking? And I think that has just, and it's through books, it's through caring leadership. You know, Bob Chapman says, everyone is someone's precious child. So if I look at that person and I keep that in mind, I'm like, I wouldn't say or do what I'm about to say or think in my head. I would never say that to someone's precious child. So stop, don't do it, you know. So, and then admit that. The other thing I do is I bring a dog with me in a lot of cases. Because people, they see you as more human if you like animals. I don't know why that is, I'm not sure, but it's really helpful. So if you're really having a hard time making the adjustment, bring a dog, or, you know, just
a small dog, or is it?
my wife is just nodding her head like you can't believe a dog. Yes, it's just great. So can you? I just wanted to maybe pick up on a couple of things that were said here. One is that you've talked about, and Lori started this off on this, what's like misconceptions about leadership, and all of you. On the panel, one of the reasons I wanted to have all of you here is because you all have people who report to you and you're trying to develop their leadership skills. And so I thought maybe you could comment, and I'll just throw it out to whoever wants to comment. What do you think are some of the misconceptions? And I'm going to give it a twist. So the twist is, I think we all know that what you talked about, the example you gave, was probably not the way to go. But what are the misconceptions that younger people have about leadership and what it takes and to do? I haven't stumped you, I know. So Bob, go for it.
Well, I'm not sure if what I'm going to say has all of the things you're thinking about with regard to younger people. But I think one of the misconceptions across the board of people about leaders and leaders about themselves, which is even more dangerous, is that leaders have all the answers. There's a misconception that if you're a leader, then you have to know it all. And we all know what it's like to work for a know-it-all. It's not fun. And I don't know if it's fun to be a know-it-all, but people should have some humility about what they know and what they don't know. A leader's job, a leader has to have some answers, right? Or have some decent opinions, but they should be shared with others who have respected opinions as well. And a leader's job is to put people together who can bring multiple possibilities to a table. And then take the result that brings a better solution from all of them. And we've been talking about that here tonight in an indirect way. Phil, you mentioned collaboration. We have a misconception about what collaboration really means. That a lot of times it means that 10 people get together in a room, the leader says, well, here's my idea, what I'd like to do. There's a couple others who say, yeah, that sounds good. And everybody else puts their head down and they're afraid to say anything. That's not collaboration. And that's not how you get the best results. So we can be better at that and people will feel better.
First, I have to laugh, Bill, because you asked us to speak on behalf of a generation we are not. And that's an issue.
That was a surprise.
Well, no, but I mean, it's an issue of older people giving voice to younger people instead of having them speak.
Right.
But when I think about it, what I gather, having worked with a lot of young people, that the perception that they need to learn and that we need to model is that leadership, good leadership, isn't obviously autocratic and doesn't need to be. And that also in lots of difficult situations, including hair color, you don't need to come to consensus. You need a leader to make a final decision. And young people also need to see the myriad opportunities that they have, and we open them for them. And that's where our responsibility comes, because leading, being a leader isn't necessarily a lifestyle ongoing or a job, but it's many opportunities where you have an impact on the place where you work, on your community, etc. There are situational opportunities for leadership that we need to highlight and train people in.
One thing you said is leadership as a job. I think the interesting perspective, and if you think about what's that perception, is that leadership is somebody else's job. I think every single person, if they felt they were a leader of their life first, leader of whatever, you know, if they're driving their car, they're a leader, they're driving their car, they're the leader of their household, they're a leader in everything they do, instead of going, oh, well, Bill, you're the leader, so what do we do? Or you get to be blamed for whatever. Like, how does that balance? It's not a job, it's an action, it's a mindset, it's leading forward, it's how you show up.
Yeah, I want to address the issue of leading across generations. Pretty early in my tenure as an athletic director at Colgate University, faced a situation. Colgate has a long and storied history in football, and the coach that I had hired, the team was 0-11 in his third year of a 4-year contract, which is not very good. Yeah, well, another lesson. I offered him the job, and he turned me down, and I went back to him through a mutual friend, and he accepted. So once somebody turns me down now, I never try to convince them. That was their best. That was their instinct. They didn't want to work there. So anyway, we're 0-11. I go to the president of our university and say, I need to fire the coach. We need a new coach. He said, well, he's got a year left. I'm not going to let you fire him. And so the person I had succeeded as athletic director was a man named Fred Dunlap. a mentor to me. He came in my senior year, and when I was captain of the team, and he and I worked together, and he took an average team, and we ended up going 10-1 that year and had a great season. And so he and I were talking about it, and I said, Fred, we have to make a change. He said, you know what, Mark, I'll be willing to do this. I will come out of retirement. He was like 72 at the time. And I'll be the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach, and you can go to the university and say we're saving a position. So, make a long story short, the president said, that's fine, you can do it. And what was amazing to me, and I was worried because Fred had been out of coaching, he was 72 years old, and that team that was 0-11 the year before started out 0-4. We won our last 7 games and played in the Patriot League championship game. And the lesson I learned is players loved him because they knew that he could help them play better. And so if you're a leader and you can and these were 18, 19, 20-year-old student athletes, and it was just amazing to see the respect and and it was all because they saw clearly I'm a better player because of what he's teaching me.
Maybe you could talk, and some of you could talk about the role of patience in the role of a leader, because that story reminds me of the power of patience and how difficult it is to, when you've got a results-driven industry, whether it's politics or working with Microsoft or Bolt or the credit union or whatever, it's a results-driven industry at the end of the day. So how do you go about striking the right balance and dealing with the patience issue?
Well, I'll just say, you look across the NFL, and not that that's the best place, but there's a lot of teams, including the Washington Redskins, my old team. They go through head coach after head coach after head coach because they aren't patient enough and they don't give them time to be successful. One of the franchises that I have the most respect for is Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Rooney family. I think they've had 2 head coaches in 30 years, and that's the kind of continuity that that's not to say that you don't have to make difficult decisions sometimes, but I think you also you need to be patient and make sure you're giving people enough time to really prove themselves.
I think too, results. We coined the concept of R squared. It's real. Balancing results and relationships. You can't have relationships without results in business. It doesn't work that way. You can't have results without relationships. And we've tried to really bring a balance to that. And if we get tilted one way, the employees will call me out if I get tilted on the results side too much. They don't like that, because then you lose sight of who they are, what they bring to the table, and why we do what we do. Because I think one generational difference is the focus on purpose, being part of something bigger, being really impactful in a positive way is really important it's important to all the different generations, but it seems more a focus now, which is awesome. I think that's cool. So always balancing the two, because I always say, I fake patience all day long. The minute I get up to the minute I go to bed, I'm faking patience. But I can always lead with the relationship first, results will come. And if I think of it that way, the patience kind of goes to the back.
Peter, you look like you wanted to jump in on this.
I can jump in. Always.
I know you can. I have faith in you.
Okay, so let's see. So when I think about it, there's a tension there between having to report business results to the street and having people show up at work every day with their lives happening and things on the backside where you don't know what happened when they walked in the door, when I walked in the door and I'm not in a good mood, when we have competing priorities with clients who need things and they're not happy. There's a tension there. And so I think about this idea of patience, and it is almost for me about understanding and recognizing that humans are showing up in the room every day, and everybody has these competing agendas. Some of them are, I have this tension and I have to report this thing out and I have to get it done. And on the same token, I'm not in a good mood today. And so how do we show up together in the room? And then how do we lead, whether we're leading from position or leading from behaviors and action? Because you can be a leader in any position you're in. And I think the leadership for me is really about recognizing walk in the room and what they need. So, and I think that's where the patience begins.
I'm going to go to Bob, and then we'll come to you, Barbara. Is that okay? Bob?
Yeah, I think all of that is, I agree with all of that. Whether it's across generations or in a generation, different people, each of them are different and they require different levels of patience. And you have to understand where the person is and how much patience and how much help. Some people need a little more help in coaching than others. And once they get lit up about something, they will take off on their own. Others need a little more help along the way. And then there are others that as much help as you put into it, it doesn't work. And my rule of thumb has always been, and I've waited too long on decisions myself, I know we all have, but if I have to work harder than the person at getting improvement, then it's time. But if I see improvement and I see the coaching is working and my patience is helping and they're having the tolerance for that, let's run a long career with them. Let's help them do better. Let's help them be the best that they can be. And I think all too often we don't help them understand how the things they get excited about should be aligned with the outcomes that the business wants. Because to get them juiced up about the business results, get all of us juiced up about the results, we got to get results as leaders. And to get people really engaged in that and feeling like 15% engagement is too low, and get their enthusiasm up around business results is really the golden goose, I think.
Barbara, you want to jump in on this too?
I do. I want to speak in a larger context in that I think we have to recognize that younger generations are running out of patience with us. A year and a half ago or so, the Business Roundtable, the most prestigious leadership and CEOs of the biggest corporations in the country, issued a statement that was absolutely stunning and got great coverage because they said, we realize we have been mistaken in putting all of our emphasis on quarterly profit reports, on what comes out to the street, as Alita said. And that emphasis on quarterly profit reports has cost us our environment. It's done great damage in many ways in communities and families, and we've lost a lot of opportunities for sustainable growth in our nation. And we are now at a crisis point. People are finally in all corners having to acknowledge climate change, for instance. And so a younger generation that is coming into the workplace and saying, huh, you know, this company is polluting, this company, you know, blah, blah, blah. We need to listen, and we need to reconsider those values that are putting all of us in tremendous peril right now. And we need them in our workforce, and we have a lot to learn from them, again, with that longer view of the future. And I just think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, you bring up an issue that is really interesting because of, I mean, one of the things that the panel seems to agree upon is that relationships are first and then results are second. But the third issue that emerges from this discussion is mission. And how do you relate, and it seems like, and Lori, you started us off, I mean, mission was the last thing we thought about in some generations. Things like, you know, whatever the, you know, issue is that's your passion. How do you incorporate and deal with those mission related issues in a reasonable way. I mean, it's not just a political question, but it's for everything.
But can I just also say that how do we deal with the fact that we have these young people who have no safe, affordable place for childcare, which is a political problem and a community problem that that has nothing to do with mission, but it has to do with how do you fill a workforce with top quality people.
Yeah, I would just say, I think younger people, they want to be able to make a difference, and I think what I've seen is that they want to be part of something bigger than them, and that's where I think with our organization, we talk a lot about our mission, vision statement, and one of the keys for us is that we want to be stewards. So we want to leave the organization better than we found it. You know, we're a community-owned franchise, very unique. I think that does, you know, appeals to a lot of the younger generation, I see.
Great. Anybody else want to comment on that, or how about if we switch gears here and ask? This has been very revealing and very interesting. So great. Thanks for sharing all those things. I'm going to show you a quote that I sent you before. So they've had an advance answer to look at this. And this is a quote from Henry Kissinger's book on leadership. And I'll briefly read it. It says, "Yet the costs of television are substantial, privileging emotional display over self-command, changing the kinds of people and the arguments that are taken seriously in public life. The shift from print to visual culture continues with the contemporary entrenchment of the internet and social media, which brings with that them forever biases that make it more difficult for leaders to develop their capabilities than in the age of the print. These are immediacy, intensity, polarity, and conformity." So I brought that up because I found that a very provocative quote. I don't know if I agree with it, and I don't know if you agree with it, but I thought it would be interesting to have you comment and embrace a little uncertainty, which I like to do, and have you comment on that.
I know when I first saw this, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to read this 10 times just to digest what it's saying. But it actually told me something about, you know, I'm one of the 65 or 80% of people who are visual. You know, show me a picture and I'm going to remember that. Show me a video of something happening and I'm going to remember that really quickly. And I think that's what this is saying is our world right now gets just bombarded with media, you know, whether it's through social media or whatever. And it talks about print, you know, print media versus, you know, so if I'm reading something, it might take me longer to digest. So when I read this, I thought, you know, is our current generation who are so savvy with technology consuming data so much quicker than maybe the later generations who are reading it yet, or they're looking for it in different ways. So what this said to me is, how do we use that visual stimulation to get the right messages across instead of the harmful messages that are bringing mental health situations in? We're feeding, you know, I asked my daughter, hey, do you watch the news or do you look at the news? Because she's a millennial, right? I was asking them, get their voice. And she's like, no, it's depressing. Or, you know, actually I asked someone else too, they said it's depressing. It's, you know, I don't really want to see that. And it's really not important to me. And I figure it'll bubble up to me if it needs to. So it's just a very different view of, I think I grew up in a household where they read the newspaper every single day, cover to cover.
What year was this quote made?
This was last year, I believe.
Oh, okay, all right. I was because it's pretty social media.
I think it may have been this year, as a matter of fact. Well.
Yeah, well, I'm a dinosaur. I write handwritten notes. I think those are better. I like getting them, and I think it you have to think about it, and it takes time. And I mean, getting a thumbs up on a on a text is good, but I think taking the time to think out and write a note makes a lot of sense. And you know, our media is so different now. You look at, I mean, I grew up living in Washington D.C. and I couldn't wait to get the Washington Post, read through it. I mean, mostly sports, but I would read the rest of it. Now the paper, there's nothing to the paper, and it's I mean, obviously very few people. It's all online, and by the time you read it in the print version, it's old news. So it's changing rapidly.
Bob, you want to jump in? And I'm sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
I found this to be a really interesting quote, and by many measures. When I thought about privileging emotional display over self-command, and we think about the recent firings and cable TV, but that is a loss of, if you're privileging that display, we are experiencing a loss of dignity in leaders. And actually, politics is about the dignity of daily life. I mean, that's what it is about. And so what we have in this shift, whether he's accurately describing all of it, but those four biases that he names are realities for people who serve as leaders in the political realm, and in terms of how they achieve a position from which to lead, and what kind of compromises they're making, and why they get locked into very crazy little corners. I don't think that it's more difficult for leaders to develop their capabilities because of them. They just choose to conform or go with the flow. But what also happens with those things is, in our civic life, all sorts of people would rather take to their bed and pull the covers up than be engaged.
Right, and the reason why it appealed to me was because my life was filled with reading biographies of great men and women, and that's how I learned about leadership and learned my own philosophy, and that's not happening as much now. So Bob, you wanted to jump in on this.
Yeah, the last four words, the biases, the first two I think are the reality of the world we're in. Fast speed, immediate information, intensity of information, that's only going to get faster. The problem is in the last two words, because what it's creating is polarity and conformity. And the polarity is because, you know, we don't have time to think about the things that are set up in terms of differences of opinion in the first two, the fast information. We don't take time to debate it and come to any kind of consensus and understanding. And so there are the people who end up being the loud voices or the quote winners in the public eye. And there are those who conform, who are quiet because they don't think they can have an impact. And I think that is the more dangerous part of, because the polarity and the conformity is what's going to foster additional division. And we don't need more division.
I think the one thing too, it's odd that there's no level of accuracy. You know, I mean, we hear it all the time, that's fake news, that's false news. So I think sometimes people aren't watching, they aren't listening when they should be.
Are there editors anymore? Is there anybody checking?
Right. That's exactly it.
Yeah, well, and it's all about getting clicks. I you know, just saw something online the other day, and it says Packers president makes shocking statement. What the hell? What did I do?
You were supposed to save that for tonight, Mark.
I think my shocking statement was, I said, you know, Aaron Rodgers will retire his number. And it's like, that's not really shocking.
Lita, did you want to jump in on this?
Sure. So in true fashion, I did a academic exercise around this one. So this is my academic exercise. So immediacy, this is about rapid response in the decision making in business, right? Like the decisions we have to make are going faster and faster, and there's a consequence to this, which is a lack of careful consideration. Then you go to the intensity and you say, well, if social media and viral content is out there, the consequence of that is the popularity wins over substance quite frequently. But then you go to polarity and you say, well, we've got all of this black and white content that's coming at us, and so it's driving to the edges. And if that is happening, there's a lack of nuance in our discussions and our decisions that we're making. And then if you go to conformity, you say there's filters that are being applied to all of the information we're receiving through the AI that is out there, and the consequence of that is it's limiting opposing viewpoints. It's driving to a lack of opposition to have those real deep, robust conversations. Then I went a little bit further and I thought, okay, so what happens with AI? Because this is starting to be driven by technology. And I thought, well, from a bias perspective, it's exacerbating biases through algorithms, and it's prioritizing our attention. So we're looking at things and we're being prioritized into, like, what is it and what does it mean? Well, it's telling us what we should be thinking about and seeing. But on the flip side of it, what it's mitigating is it's giving us analytics, and it's giving us data, and it's giving us access to information to identify trends that we never could see before. So, you know, you can't look at this and say, is there something good or is there something bad in it? It's just there's a changing dynamic in our society, and how do we really think about that, and what does that mean for us is what I start to think about when I read this quote. So
yeah, I appreciate those comments. I think this is a deep discussion, and one of the cool things was that Barbara mentioned that she tried to resolve the polarity by building relationships across the aisle, essentially. And so it's really interesting to look at those dynamics. Well, we could continue this discussion for quite some time because we got a bunch of really smart people who have a lot of energy and a lot of insight. But I promised them that we would end with having each of them tell us what their favorite leadership quote was and why it was their favorite leadership quote. And I just open it up to any other comments you want to make that you feel you need to make tonight, if you're game with that. So I've got the quotes up on the PowerPoint because that's one thing professors know how to do, is use PowerPoint. And so Laura, you're up first. You want me to read it, or you want
to? So it's grow where you're planted. You know, I was born and raised in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I was always trying to escape. I always thought it was bigger and better. New York, I need to go to California. It'd be more cool to say, well, I'm from California, or I'm from New York. And someone said to me after I had no money and had to work my way through college and my master's and everything that went along with that, he said, it was one of my bosses, and he said, Lord, just grow where you're planted. You can grow where you're planted. You don't have to go to Harvard to grow. And he goes, and plus, nobody really, unless you have a Harvard sweatshirt on, you know, nobody really even knows where you went. But that taught me to embrace where I was, and that was in every job that I had, whether I loved the job or not, or loved the boss or not, or whatever the case is, just try to grow where I was planted, and then help others grow where they're planted, and help them see how they can grow in their job, their current companies, even if it's not where they want to be yet.
Great, that's very helpful. I think we've got Alita next. Alita.
Okay, so
you want me to read it, or you have it?
So I can read it.
Oh, you see it up there. I didn't know it was even up there. I keep turning my head. So.
It's amazing.
There we go.
So in the high country of the mind, one has to become adjusted to the thinner air of uncertainty and the enormous magnitude of questions asked, and to the answers proposed to these questions. So this is, the reason I love this quote is because I have known Phil for 700 years. And he taught something in school, and he continues to teach this, which is really, it's all about the questions you ask. And so when I stumbled on this quote, I don't know, 500 years ago, it really sort of sat with me, because we're living in this enormous magnitude of uncertainty. And I think if we're asking questions, we can work our way through it. And so I think that I live by this every day.
So how difficult has it been to embrace uncertainty in your job? And we actually have wrote a book about that, and Bob and I worked on that for a long time. So how, and particularly bringing along, frankly, other people sometimes who, we talked about that last night, as a matter of fact. So how do you address that challenge?
Oh, look, we all want stability and consistency and certainty. People drive towards that. So to constantly bring to the surface that we live in something that is called an evolutionary state. It is we do not live in a stagnant state. In business, in life, there are ebbs and flows. And so, I think I've made it my mission to be an agitator in the system, to say we're never going to know the answer here. And so, yeah, it's difficult, because I think difficult but interesting, right? We as people are always going to be in a state of uncertainty. And I don't know, one tiny little story about Phil. When I met Phil, I remember going to his office. I was a student, and I remember saying to him, hey, I'm really curious. I'd really like to learn about change. And he said, hey, do you want to learn about uncertainty? You want to go explore that? And so this has been something Phil has done forever and has taught, and I think it opens people up to understand what the world is. We're not living in a state of stagnant certainty. So,
thank you. Next, we have Bob. Bob, tell us about this.
Yeah. So this is a quote by Oscar Bolt. It says, values are everything. If you get the values right, everything else follows. So I helped Oscar and his son Tom run the Bolt Company for over 20 years. And I learned a lot from Oscar, but this is one of the things he always used to say. And I thought, if you ask the audience, do you have values, do you believe in values, we'd all say yes, right? But he understood them at a deeper level. And so he wanted to make sure that the people he worked with were honest, they told the truth, they were sincere, they were respectful, and all of those values that make it so easy to work with people. And he'd always say, if you get those right, everything else is easy, because you don't have to walk back everything else that you didn't get right because your values aren't right. And it's a very high standard, but it's a standard that is worth living by, I think, and he was a brilliant man.
Could you just talk briefly about the word, how patience plays into the role of values? It seems to me that one of the things that we've talked about is that by having core values that mostly people can relate to, it allows you as a leader to be more patient with them.
Yeah, because I think it allows you as a leader to coach better and listen better and be more empathetic to different points of view, and be more interested in what people have to say and the implications of what they have to say on the issues. And in order to engage them and get that all on the table, it takes a great deal of patience to work your way through. And patience translates into time. And time is often the thing that we say, well, I can't take that much time. But there's another little quote that's not up here, but I always say, pay me now, pay me later, but you're going to pay me more if you pay me later, if you don't take the time.
You taught me that, and I believe that deeply now. I didn't before. Next, we have Barbara. And I see it over there. If you want to read it, that's great.
Sure. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And I guess that is pretty much what I have felt both in my civic and political life, is that we need more people to help build a vision for our future, to be lifelong learners, like Alita, who is an incorrigible academic, which I love. I absolutely do. And if people will do more and become more, you're a leader, but it's not quite servant leadership, but it is, it's simply activating talent around us, which must happen.
Thank you very much, and you've certainly done that in your lifetime and career. Our final, I'm going to ask one more question after this, so
Sure.
but I'm going to give our final one. There's Mark Murphy.
Richard Carlson.
Uh,
It was actually my
somebody
father,
else?
Hugh Murphy.
Okay.
My father had, well, maybe Richard Carlson also said it. My father might have stole it from him. But so my father had what he called his words of wisdom. And when I was growing up, you know, and then it was kind of stuff like, don't sweat the small stuff. The harder you work, the better you do. I'd just roll my eyes. It was just so corny. But as I've gone through life, I realized that there's a lot of wisdom in what he's actually saying. To me, don't sweat the small stuff is really keeping things in perspective. You know, I think I see it a lot with leaders that whether it's paralysis by analysis or you're in a big situation and everybody's looking at you, and if you panic and you act like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? This is ridiculous. I think they want to see you understand the situation and have a calmness. And that's to me what that is all about, is just keeping things in perspective. Just kind of share a funny story. That really resonated in my mind 15 years ago when Brett Favre retired, then changed his mind, and we ended up trading him to the Jets. I kept thinking to myself, and it was a big deal. It was on the news, but I kept thinking to myself, players retire, we'll get through this, and it really did help me. Little did I know that, and the other thing I said is, and it really helps when you have an Aaron Rodgers who can fit right in and follow Brett Favre and play. Little did I know that 15 years from then I'd be in the exact same situation.
Well, I want to thank the panelists. They've done a great job, haven't they? I think we could. I could interview you guys for another hour or two, but I don't think we would that would allow that. So I wanted to just end the session today by thanking some people. Alex, right here, thank you. And Ruth, where are you, Ruth? Back in the back, who I just met. Thank you, Ruth. Anthony Warner, Tony, where are you? Thanks. He's from the university. I don't know if Mike Schmidt is here for our university communication. Emily, where are you guys? Emily and Sid took this on as a special project, just a chance to work with you guys and see what's happening. And then the entire Widener Center staff that's out there. And finally, I want to thank, we want to thank the Tommy Thompson Center and Tommy Thompson for sponsoring this. This is an amazing event. They are the ones who agreed to help with to provide every one of you a copy of the book, and a lot of that leading with care and leading through relationships, you called it R squared, is contained in that idea. So I just wanted to thank the panelists again, Bob DeKoch, and Alita Al-Sadi, Barbara Lawton, Mark Murphy, and Lori Butts to finish it all up. Thank you guys so much for showing up. It's been a blast, and I'm sure that we would be willing to chat with you afterwards. Thank you so much.
And maybe sign a couple books.
Oh, sign up. Bob will sign books, and I'll sign books. Thank you so much.